All right. Hey, I've been working on something about agriculture and environmental impact, and it got me thinking about how ethical considerations play into it. Since we know each other pretty well, I thought it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on some of the questions I've been exploring.
I would love to give you some perspectives.
Um, cool. First one will be, what comes to mind when you think about agriculture's role in society?
Agriculture is an essential pillar of society. Because if we think about our society without modern agriculture, we wouldn't be able to dedicate the time, energy, and resources to all of these other industries and philosophies and things without having our food squared away. So we used to have to spend so much of our day procuring our food, whether it was hunting and gathering or agriculture on a small scale. And now that we have our modern agriculture, we don't have to worry about that as much. It comes to us in the supermarket, and we can have all these different jobs and spend all our time in other ways. So it is essential to a high functioning society.
Very cool. And do you think people realize how much agriculture impacts the environment, like through water usage, deforestation, the pesticides they use?
I think those things are very well hidden from the general consumer. I think we aren't taught to think about the lifespan of a product before it comes to us. So they just think about it on the supermarket shelves and not necessarily how it got there and what it took for it to get there.
Awesome. And how do you think modern agriculture practice have impacted the environment both positively and negatively?
Well, there's definitely going to be more negative than positive. So the way we generally go about, and this is from a U.S. perspective, I'm not sure what else they're doing in other countries, but we are using so many pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers to get a certain yield of crops, and we don't really think about how that's affecting things in the area and in the watershed, like further away from it. So, like the nutrient load from all of those chemicals get washed down into the groundwater and the surrounding watersheds and down rivers, and those influence the ecosystems in those waterways and everything that depends on those waterways. And that's why you have things like algal blooms in the Gulf of Mexico, and then those algal blooms take all the oxygen from the water and cause fish to die, and it just kind of wreaks havoc on environments that aren't even local to what's happening. And then it's negatively impacting the resources that go in. I mean, like the water that they're using in the land itself are being taken away from that environment itself to use. So it's completely in a non-natural state once it's being used for agriculture. And like with the runoff of those pesticides, the resources that go into the agriculture are also being taken from places that aren't local. Like, that's why you have rivers that can't reach the coastline anymore, and that's why cities are forced to not use as much water because so much is going toward agriculture.
Yeah, I didn't realize, because I went yesterday to volunteer at that Nashville Wildlife Conservation, and the three main things that bring the eastern box turtles in was lawnmowers, car collisions, and pesticides. And never would I have thought pesticides could affect a turtle.
Mm-hmm.
You know that, and eastern box turtles are now vulnerable because of it, which I had no idea either.
But yeah, like the stuff that consumers can buy themselves, like the Roundup, it's so concentrated
bad.
And just shouldn't even be allowed. Like, that's probably what's hurting those little turtles.
Yeah, and causes a lot of neurological like disorders for them. But even like neem oil, we learned a couple days ago. Me and my sister looked this up that it's actually like banned in a lot of places,
Ooh.
which we use it, everywhere. So crazy. Next one. What does sustainable agriculture mean to you, and what kind of practices do you think make agriculture more sustainable?
So sustainable agriculture is going to be producing agriculture in a way that is not compromising the resources of future generations or current generations. So it's being smarter with the resources that do go into agriculture, like the water, and making more of a closed system rather than just thinking we have infinite water, we can just use all this water and not think about the consequences. And a lot of that just needs to be regulated, and for those regulations to actually be enforced, which sometimes happens and then a lot of the time doesn't happen. And if we were to get closer to something like permaculture, which is working with the state of the land how it is and producing food with the system rather than against the system, it would be a lot less harmful. So like a permaculture, it's hard to imagine it on a wide scale like that, but permaculture, like in your backyard, you could use your own like micro watershed system and see like what food producing plants are going to grow well on this side of your house with this much rainfall, and what food producing plants are going to be better on like south facing. It's like working with all those systems, as opposed to just clearing off land, putting some chemicals there and expecting everything to grow. So that's what an ideal agriculture system would be, but we are very far from that.
Yeah, because like most farms, they have to like not use this. They can't even use the same fields every year after year because they just like strip the soil of the nutrients and especially the nitrogen and stuff like that. So I know like there's certain plants that you can, like veggies that you can plant with other veggies to like, create a sustainable soil itself by just adding different plants into the soil next to those crops.
And I know you know about how like bacterially complex healthy soil is supposed to be, and like with all the funguses and stuff that are naturally present in there, those are not going to be there in regular agriculture
because of the chemicals.
And that's what gives us so many of our nutrients too, is all that extra, all those goodies in the soil.
The microbiome of the soil itself. Cool. Let's see. What challenges do you think farmers face when trying to implement more sustainable practice?
So a specific local example that I have was when I lived out in the boonies, there was this woman who had a farm. I think she just raised chickens and like different types of birds. I think it was called Henicity Farms, but it was just one lady who ran it, and she, like, every time I visited her, she was saying how much she was struggling because it was basically just her. She couldn't really get volunteers out there. Like, there aren't really good systems to help local farmers who want to have more sustainable practices and like, don't want to just shove all their chickens in this big macro scale thing. She said it was really hard for her to get funding, and even though she would get articles and stuff written about her and would be in these local magazines, there wasn't a consistent system of help because it's really just not enough income to support yourself. She was working like way more hours than a regular person would, like 60 plus hours just trying to upkeep with her farm. So it's just hard to find the help. And they say that you can get funding for these things, but it's not as easily
accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, like, to even, like, be able to apply, you have to have, like, so many acreage, or, like, your income has to be so much based on, like, what you're producing. And I'm definitely sure it's hard to find people who want to, now work outside and tend to the land. So, especially in places where it's in Tennessee, I mean, these small towns, there's populations of hundreds of people, and that's it. So there's no help for the farmers here, especially in Tennessee. Okay, last one. How can consumers, communities, and governments support more sustainable agriculture?
Well, the more you're able to financially support local farmers, like that's going to be very important, but sometimes they are not as financially accessible as, like, going to the supermarket. So in that case, you just have to support government policies that are going to want to give them more funding, and also put more regulations on the bigger companies who are doing all this with no regard to all those resources and the environment. And they need to be under strict control with what they're using and what they're doing. And then as an individual, you can always try your best to produce food yourself, whether that's in your backyard or if you have a little hydroponic system. That makes you less dependent on the current agricultural systems that are just kind of out of hand with damaging the environment.
Yeah. Support local.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you for chatting with me about this. It's definitely interesting to see how agriculture impacts the environment, what things we can do differently to help save it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.